I was saying gynecologists could do. Before I start this, I want to acknowledge and celebrate these great guys who contributed a lot to infertility, more especially to African people here in South Africa, and acknowledge them. There are two great guys that I totally respect very much who have contributed in this infertility. And throughout my reading and preparation for this webinar and my entire academic, there are two professional gynecologists that I totally respect, and I think everybody should respect. I realize that when I read the books preparing this webinar, they are always acknowledge people from overseas, people from overseas. They don't acknowledge people from our own people, but they did a lot of work, Africans. These are the people like the one you see on the picture. This is Dr. Machubeng Patel. This is the first Black gynecologist in South Africa. And he did a lot of work. He worked a lot. At the end, he ended up working in the homeland, Grootegeluk. The second one that I think need to be acknowledged and respected is Professor Ephraim Thibedi-Mogoeng. This man was the gynecologist who, the first Black head of Department of Gynecology, and he trained many gynecologists. There's no institution where there's no gynecologist who hasn't been trained by Prof. Mogoeng. I think he's the person who trained most Blacks than any other person here in South Africa. And he ran a very big infertility clinic. I'm fortunate that I was trained by him and we ran a very big infertility clinic. Fortunately, it was during the time when Blacks were just like Blacks. We didn't have assisted reproductive technologists in Ga-Rankuwa Hospital, but we did a lot of infertility. And with the little that we had, we did a lot. Infertility, as we know, it's by definition, it is an inability to conceive. That's infertility. I request everybody to mute. I tried to mute you here. I request everybody to mute. Inability to conceive is called infertility. So, don't do that. Or if you want to define it further, if a woman cannot carry a pregnancy to term, to 9 months, a woman with repeated miscarriage is also classified as being infertile. The other, in general, 20% of couples in a population will have a problem of infertility. 20% of women or couples, men and women, will have a problem somehow of conceiving. And of that, 30% of that 20% will have a male. It will be a man. The problem will be with a man. Another 30%, the problem will be with a woman, female factor infertility.
It has changed now.
I want to invite you to visit this webinar, which I did. Let me see if I cannot. You see, the problem, let's listen. I've tried to mute you here this side, but you are not on mute. The only thing that I can do here, if I see you talking, I'll just remove you. I'm going to remove you. Rebecca, mute. Rebecca Digamela, mute. Oh, you have muted. Tembi, mute. So I want you to visit these 3 webinars. The one is male infertility, the one is female infertility, the one is sexually transmitted infection. They are found on YouTube. You just type Dr. D.T. Mahapa, maybe you type male infertility in that YouTube, you'll find many webinars. All my webinars are there in the YouTube. You visit them as to complement what I'm going to talk in this, because in this one is high technology that I'm going to talk to you. I'm not going to repeat what I've said in male and female infertility. So what is assisted conception? In assisted conception, there's been so much progress in the last 20 or 30 years or so in the diagnosis and treatment of infertile couple. And research is still going on. things are still being discovered, new drugs are coming in, new method of treatment are coming in. And as infertility is evolving, the chances of helping couples will be more and more and more. In South Africa, it's widespread. Under normal circumstances, without any intervention, 90% of a couple should have a pregnancy in 1 year, which means if I put it the other way, if a couple caught today and they stay for 1 year, there must be 90% chances that if they are not using any form of contraception, they should be pregnant. And if they stay for 2 years, there are 95% chances that a woman should be pregnant. And if a couple can stay for 3 years or more without any pregnancy, without any form of contraception, there must be a problem with infertility, because the chances of natural conception become very low. The couple can't stay 3 years without contraception, without having a baby. So in a general population, epidemiologically, 10% of couples in any population will have some form of infertility problem. It's either subfertility or pure infertility or another form of difficulty in conceiving that might need help. And usually textbook says for infertility definition is inability to conceive after 12 months. It means if you were to follow the textbook, you must go up to 12 months before you investigate. But that is not possible, because by the time they come to you for infertility, they have been trying for more than 6 months or 12 months. So we tend to make time shorter, more especially if that patient has got some form of disease that might predispose her to infertility, like a couple with endometriosis. You can't wait for 12 months, because if you see endometriosis, you know it's a causative factor for infertility. You start treating at that moment. If the patient has got a history of ectopic pregnancy, you know that if there's got history of ectopic pregnancy, probably there's got some form of tubal damage or age. If a couple a woman who's already more than 35, because fertility reduces greatly after 35. So you must start to treat it, because the chances of conception after 35 years becomes less, means fertility becomes less after 35 years. For example, I've said that if a woman has got endometriosis, you start treating, because endometriosis in itself is a cause of infertility. It damages the tubes. It blocks the egg from coming from out of the ovary, going towards the tube. It acts as a barrier between the sperm and the egg. So in that way, you have to try to treat endometriosis and clear it so that you can increase the chances of infertility. I'm not going to put all causes of infertility. I've put them in the previous webinars, but this one is very important, which is common now: delayed childbearing or delayed marriage. Most people, they follow career. They delay childbearing in pursuit of stability. I don't know what they say, financial stability, or they want relationship stability, which to me, there's no something like financial stability. You always have financial problem. You can't delay having children because you want to be financially stable, because there's nothing called financial stability. Or you want to say that this relationship must be stable. I still want to see a myth that's called a stable relationship. Even inside marriage, there are tornadoes and earthquake. And some people, of course, for good reasons, they'll follow education and say, I'm still studying. I want to finish my PhD before I start my family. In that way, they will come after 35 years when the fertility rate becomes lower. There is a saying that in the village there, that a man marries a very loyal woman, a respecting woman, thinking that and hoping that a woman will not change, but the woman will change after marriage. And they also say that a woman marries a man, a very unreliable man, dishonest man, hoping that this dishonest man will change after marriage, and the man doesn't change. So the factors, I'm just stressing that the factors that makes people delay childbearing, some of them are really not scientific. The other cause, which I want to discuss very seriously, is sexually transmitted infection. The more you delay childbearing, the more are chances that you can change sexual partner, the more the chances that you acquire sexually transmitted infection. So the couple that you have, the devil that you have, just marry. Another one which is very common and not said but is contraception. Hormonal contraception, they change the pituitary gonadal axis, your ovulation cycle, so that in themselves, if you use for a long time, they will make you either subfertile or infertile. And we see these days, children use hormone contraception. They use contraception from early age. If you start using contraception at 14, by the time he's 28, marrying is over 10 years. And then she's going to have problem of infertility because of hormones. And in South Africa, since legalization of abortion, I think abortion now is regarded as a form of contraception. There are children that, or girls that every year she's aborting. Every year she's aborting. And with abortion, they've got this subclinical infection that is going to cause endometritis, subclinical endometritis, and can cause tubal blockage and cause a lot of infertility. And a patient who has aborted before, once or twice, if she becomes infertile when she's old, she's going to suffer a psychological condition called post-traumatic stress disorder. She's going to think, if I hadn't, that child was alive, I would be having a child. And that can put her in a psychiatric hospital because she's always in a remorse that now I can't have a baby, but I had babies that I aborted. So it's not good to abort. Another one is lifestyle changes. Women now, they work, they're professionals, they eat well, they protected even constitutionally, they become obese. Obesity mechanism, the physiology of obesity on menstruation is that it tends to make anovulation because of a lot of fat cells in the body. Of course, these days women work in hazardous environment where they are exposed to environmental pollutions like in mines and furnaces, and that can also go and affect ovulation and affect the ovary and tubal blockage. I want to stress that sexually transmitted infections that I talked about, which I made a webinar about, are one of the #1 causes of infertility in our Black population. Because our children start engaging in sex very early. We have even allowed them to go to school, primary school, while pregnant, and we think it's normal. We have normalized abnormality. And as they start sex very early, the chances of changing sexual partners are high. The more the sexual partners, the more the chances that you will have sexually transmitted infection. Another one that I talked about was obesity. With obesity, you've got a fat tissue inside the abdomen, which is called omentum, which converts testosterone into estrogen. In that way, this testosterogenesis inside the fat cells and other body's fat cells that are there in fertile person, they cause a form of anovulation. A woman does not ovulate. It's not very easy to ovulate an obese patient. That's why if you go for infertility, they'll tell you, reduce your weight, which is not an easy thing to do. But obesity, the best thing about it is just to not to be obese. Exercise, eat well, then your endocrinology will be well. That way, infertility won't be there. Obesity, infertility is one of the easiest way to treat, because just to treat obesity, then the physiology becomes normal, then women start ovulating. The assisted reproductive technology that I'm going to talk about are technologies that are advanced form of a technology that are used to achieve pregnancy, which are different from the conventional ovulation induction, tuboplasty, chromoperturbation, the form of infertility that every gynecologist can do. This is done by only majority by reproductive gynecologist. If you want this, you go to a gynecologist who specializes in reproductive gynecology. They are called fertility specialists. They use this method. They use fertility enhancement medication or drugs to induce ovulation at a higher doses at a very controlled manner. In that way, they do procedures like in vitro fertilization, where spontaneous pregnancy is achieved in the laboratory rather than inside the uterus. The pregnancy happens inside the laboratory, and then they plant either the embryo or the zygote inside the uterus to grow there. Sometimes, in some selected cases, they might use artificial insemination. I'll discuss that in artificial insemination, which cases are candidate for artificial insemination when we come to that. And in very rare cases, where usually if there's male factor infertility, they might use advanced technical methods, which are very technical, like intracytoplasmic sperm injection. They inject the sperm inside the cytoplasm. We'll discuss that as we go. Of course, if everything fails, all assisted reproductive technology fails, then nothing that doesn't fail in medicine. We can resort to surrogacy. We'll touch a little bit about surrogacy. In the case where a woman has ovaries, but a uterus cannot carry pregnancy. Say, for instance, a woman has removed a uterus for some reason, some medical reason, or has got large fibroids such that the uterus can't carry pregnancy, or she has got a congenital abnormality of the uterus, which is called Major-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser syndrome, which there's no way that uterus can carry a pregnancy. Surrogacy is the way to go. Like if you look at the fibroids this size, they are more or less the size of the uterus in themselves. So they occupy the space where the baby is supposed to be. These uterus, even if you do myomectomy, it will not carry pregnancy. So in that way, surrogacy becomes the solution. Or sometimes there are congenital abnormalities called Mullerian abnormalities, where the uterus does not form. A woman develops, but the uterus does not develop, or it becomes a strict uterus. Like you can see here, this is the pelvis laparoscopy of a pelvis of a woman like that. There's no uterus. You see the catheter inside the bladder. Where it's supposed to be uterus, where there's supposed to be uterus is just a streak of tissue. This woman has got no uterus and she doesn't menstruate. In that way, she cannot carry a pregnancy. The only way she can have pregnancy is through surrogacy, which we'll discuss a bit about surrogacy, various forms of surrogacy that we can have. And it's very common to Major-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser syndrome. I personally underestimated its frequency. I think every 2 or 3 years, I must have one patient with Major-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser syndrome who presented with primary amenorrhea and has never been investigated. And he thinks, and if we find that it's like that, the treatment will be multidisciplinary because you've got to include psychology here to convince her that there's very little we can do. Although there are researches overseas about uterine transplant, if it's there, is done. It has never carried, there's no uterus that was transplanted that has ever carried a pregnancy. Research is still going on about uterine transplant. Then the last one that we must make you aware of that can make you resort to surrogacy is if you've got severe adhesions from pelvic infection, usually chlamydial infections, which blocks the tubes. And they block the tube in such a way that even if any form of tubal surgery, even microsurgery, cannot restore the tubes to near normal anatomy such that a woman can use those tubes to conceive. The only thing that you can do is do adhesiolysis as we do it here, just to reduce pain and normalize the anatomy. But pregnancy is unlikely to be achieved in that way because the only way you can do with the tubes that have been damaged by that is to remove them and cut them. And once you remove the tube, you have sterilized that woman. Assisted reproductive technology as I said, is a technology that is used to achieve pregnancy. It uses fertility and enhancement medication, very expensive one, an advanced reproductive method to achieve pregnancy in a couple who find it difficult to have a baby, to have pregnancy. It includes procedures such as in vitro fertilization. It's the most common one. Some people call in vitro fertilization test tube baby. I'll explain to you. There's no baby who develops in a test tube. We'll see as we go. I don't know why they call it test tube baby. Procedures like artificial insemination and surrogacy are the main one. These are fertility therapies where an egg and sperm are manipulated in the laboratory to achieve fertilization in the laboratory. After the fertilization has happened, the zygote or the embryo that develops from there is the one that's going to be implanted inside the uterus, which means they manually remove the egg from the woman and take sperm from the man and combine them in the laboratory. And if they combine, they fertilize, then they can fertilize egg, which is an embryo or a zygote, is then implanted. This is the table that shows the major types of advanced assisted reproductive technologies. It's IVF, intracytoplasmic sperm injection, gamete intrafallopian transfer, zygote intrafallopian transfer, and surrogacy. These are the ones that we are going to discuss now. These are the methods, the same ones that I told you there, that there's intrauterine insemination. Intrauterine insemination, it can either be by husband sperm or by donor sperm. Sometimes if there's severe male factor infertility, the sperms cannot fertilize, we'll use a donor sperm. But majority will use the husband sperm or gamete intrafallopian tube transfer, which can either be the gametes from the couple itself, or they can use the gametes that have been donated, either donate ovaries, the egg is donated or the sperm is donated. Of course, IVF can use both ZIFT and pronuclear stage intrafallopian transfer is a form of a ZIFT, but depending on which stage do you do. The commonest that most laboratories do is in vitro fertilization and embryo transfer. ICSI is in selected cases, and it's not without cost, it's a cost. As a general rule, when you say infertility, there's nothing called a woman is infertile or a man is infertile. Infertility is a disease of a couple. It's the couple that's infertile. There are male factors that contribute to infertility and female factors. So both men and a woman need to go together and travel this road of infertility together. As I explained in the previous webinars on female infertility and the one on male infertility, which I said you can find it on Google or you can find it on YouTube and revise yourself. Let's start with in vitro fertilization and embryo transfer. It's usually abbreviated as IVF. It's a method where an egg is fertilized by sperm outside the human body. They take an egg from a woman, they take a sperm from a man and fertilize them in the laboratory inside a petri dish. Then the embryo is formed. A fertilized egg is called, and it starts by forming a zygote, and then it becomes an embryo. If an embryo are formed, then this embryo is transferred in the uterus where it will implant. Of course, the uterus would have been prepared with drugs in order to accommodate the embryo that has been transferred. In that way, the woman will have to go through, or the couple will have to go through a process of stimulation of the ovaries so that they can produce many eggs. When they're going to harvest, they shouldn't harvest only one egg, because in IVF, usually they implant 2 or 3 embryos, hoping that one will implant. Majority, 2 will implant. That's why majority of them have twins. Very rare cases will have triplets, which means all 3 that are implanted, they have that have been transferred are implanted. And after stimulating, they retrieve the eggs from there. On the other hand, the semen of the man should have been analyzed and found to be normal. If it's abnormal, of course, they will use other medication to improve it. If it can't, then they'll use other methods like ICSI. Then they fertilize them outside the body, and then they transfer the embryo, then pregnancy is achieved. It's a process that you go through. They teach the patient how to cooperate along the road, because if you don't cooperate, then the majority, more than 50% of the work is done by the couple itself. Because the first thing, the follicles suppression is the first thing. They give injections, they give the couple injections that he will inject himself at home to suppress the ovary so that they mustn't ovulate. There mustn't be a dominant follicle. Usually, under normal physiological process, ovulation, there's one follicle which is dominant, which ovulate every month. Another one grows as dominant ovulate. They suppress them so that by the time they do ovulation induction, they recruit as many as possible of follicles so that they can be able to harvest more than 1 or 2 or 3 eggs from one ovary. So the first step is follicle suppression. And then later, they are going to do a controlled ovarian hyperstimulation. Hyperstimulation, I mean, they stimulate it very heavily so that it can produce many eggs. And when those eggs are produced, eggs are follicles, then the eggs are taken from those follicles and aspirated. It's good to aspirate more than 1 or 2, 3 follicles at a time and look at them under the microscope and see fertilize the one that looks very much normal. If fertilization occurs, then this embryo that are formed are selected. Embryo, of course, will be different. Others will be normal, others will be abnormal. They look for the normal embryos that are the ones that are being implanted. The question is, if they are all normal, what do you mean? They can implant others, and others can be stored for future pregnancies. Even eggs can be stored for future pregnancies if they've harvested more than, say, they harvest 8 eggs, they use only 3. The 7 you can pay, they can put there. After 2 years, you can use them. You can put those eggs in a bank in the laboratory where they can freeze them and you can use them thereafter. If pregnancy occurs, then that's the aim of IVF. I said that the cooperation of the patient and the couple is very important because, most especially during stimulation, the first step, which is follicle suppression, the patient is given injections. I don't want to mention the name of injections here because I'll be advertising others. Where you inject yourself on the abdomen or on the thighs. They'll teach you how to inject yourself. This is a process called follicular suppression so that your ovaries can be suppressed and no follicle will be dominant. By the time you take medication, which usually medication are taken orally, like in form of tablets, then you can recruit as many, more than 1 or 2 follicles. Because without prior follicular suppression, there will be like physiological dominant follicles. There will be only 1 follicle which is dominant, which is ovulating. So if there's going to be harvesting of an egg, you can only harvest 1, and we don't want to harvest 1. This is the type of injections that the patient is given, and she's taught how to inject herself at home. It will be about 10 days that you inject yourself in a cycle on the abdomen, and then thereafter you come. Ultrasound will show that the ovaries are suppressed. Then they do control ovarian hyperstimulation. We start stimulating them very heavily, and during control hyperstimulation, they will be monitoring the growth of the follicles. A normal follicle grows about 2 to 3 millimeters a day. So we'll be going to the laboratory about every 3 to 4 days to see whether the follicles are growing until the one follicle is between 18 and 24. Because after 24 millimeters, then it's going to be ovulating. Because we don't want ovulation spontaneously. Between 18 and 24 millimeters, that's when aspiration of egg happens. Because otherwise, if the patient ovulates, you want to have egg to aspirate from the ovary. Of course, on the other hand, the blood will be taken from the woman to see if the hormones shows that the lining of the uterus, which is endometrium, is ready for implantation, because there's some medication will be given to prepare the uterus ready for implantation. So just before spontaneous ovulation, when the follicles are between 18 and 24 millimeters, then the eggs will be retrieved, which is called, these are the ultrasound picture of the follicles that you measure and find that is between 24, from 18, but must be more than 24, more than 24 millimeters, then they are going to ovulate by themselves. And the process is very easy. It can be done under local anesthesia, under conscious anesthesia, not under Nyamezela, because it's an invasive process.
Join me for an egg retrieval. It's one of my favorite procedures. We use an ultrasound in order to see the ovary clearly. We place a needle into each follicle, drain that follicular fluid in order to capture each egg, pass the fluid into a test tube. That's where the term test tube baby comes from. The embryologist picks up the fluid and looks through it very carefully to find each egg. It's absolutely amazing.
That's where the test tube baby, the term test tube baby comes, because when they retrieve the egg, they put it in a test tube. But fertilization doesn't happen in the test tube. It happens in a petri dish. That's what was happening.
A needle is attached to the vaginal ultrasound probe. Both are introduced into the vagina. Under ultrasound guidance, the needle is inserted through the vaginal wall towards the ovary and is introduced into one of the follicles. The content of the follicle is aspired and is passed through a closed circuit of tubes to the test tube.
This is exactly what
This test tube will be analyzed by a biologist to separate the ovum from the follicular liquid. Once aspiration of the follicle is finished, the needle is inserted into the next follicle, which is then aspirated. This process is repeated until all the follicles have been aspirated.
This is in view of what is going to happen. And these eggs are fertilized inside, not inside the chest. They are put inside a petri dish with the sperm in the laboratory. And the procedure must be very subtle. The technologists working there, they know exactly what they do. They create an artificial physiological innate body, the laboratory, where physiologically the system is like the temperature, the humidity, the pH is more or less like in the human body, so that the fertilization can take place. And those eggs that are there after being fertilized, the technologists or the doctor look at them every day through the microscope to see if there's any cleavage. With cleavage means division of cells. There's at a certain stage of cleavage, then implantation can take place or transfer, which is called in vitro fertilization or fertilization in vitro, where egg and sperm in a petri dish are fertilized and put in an incubator for some few days. And after fertilization, when cleavage occurs, they look at the 4-cell stage, 8-cell stage, 60-cell stage, before the morular stage, then is implanted. This needs daily monitoring and the timing of transfer, but they'll tell you what to do. This is the sperm and egg in a petri dish put together for fertilization to take place. Once fertilization takes place, the cells will start dividing. And once they start dividing, they'll form a ball of cells. A ball of cells like that is called morula. Usually, the transfer takes place before the stage of morula. It takes place when you are still about 16-cell stage. Nowadays, with advanced technology, they don't look at it every day in the microscope. Inside the laboratory, there's a camera that monitors the egg 24 hours. And in the morning, what they do, they look what's happening. And what's happening there, they can watch it on the screen in a computer and see that this egg has been multiplying throughout the night. And they can be able to see which one is multiplying better, which one, the process called mitosis, which one is bad, like this one doesn't matter, is a bad mitosis, until they can choose the one with a better mitotic division, a better cell division, is the one that's going to be implanted. You can see that that one is implanted, it has multiplied in better, is about 16-cell stage, can multiply. This camera monitors the egg 24/7. And in the morning, the images are stored and the biologist and the doctor can see that which eggs are multiplying, which one are not multiplying. And embryo transfer it's once an embryo then transferred inside the ready uterus, is done not under anesthesia. You don't need anesthesia to do that. Just while you are awake, they can, with an ultrasound guidance, they can put the embryo there. And usually they do 3 or 5 days after fertilization has taken place, which means those eggs will be monitored for 4 or 5 days for them to multiply and give an embryo enough, mature enough to be transferred. And the pregnancy test, after 7 days after embryo transfer, then they can do a pregnancy test, which we do by blood. And if it's positive, hurrah, we know that it's like that. This I want just to show, said that embryo transfer is done with the patient awake under ultrasound guidance.
Expertly performed embryo transfer using ultrasound guidance is a critical part of the IVF process. Here we see the catheter tip coming up into the uterine cavity from the cervix. We advance the catheter tip just past the middle of the cavity, then pull back slightly and press the plunger. We see a flash of media containing the embryos coming from the tip. Then we slowly withdraw the catheter and it's done. That should do the trick.
That's embryo transfer, as simple as that. Then, but this I was mostly on the woman's side. On the man's side, as I said, the road must travel the road together. On the men's side, they should have done collection of sperm and analyze the sperm to look at the shape of the sperm, the morphology of the sperm, whether they are normality or normality, the percentage of normal sperm, the percentage motility, whether motility means are they mobile, do they move forward, not that they're just shaking on one place, and they look at the pH of the sperm, the presence or absence of infection. Like you can see, these sperms here are very active and they are moving forward. Sperm must move forward. It's like a tadpole. It mustn't swim at one place. If sperms are moving and have got forward motility, that's a good sperm count. And it will be a percentage mobility. No man has got all sperm moving forward. Some of sperms will be abnormal. Like you see, there's a sperm there which is just teaching at one place. There will be, and I'll show you another one where the sperms are moving. If you look here.
In this video, we'll be looking at sperm specimens with varying motility scores utilizing the microscopes in our fertility laboratory. As we zoom in on this specimen with more and more magnification, we can see that the sperm motility is pretty good. Most of the sperm are progressively motile. Sperm motility scores represent the percentage of sperm that are actively swimming in a forward direction. Low sperm motility is a common cause of infertility. This specimen shows both a good count and a good motility. Here it is at higher magnification, where we can get a better idea of the morphology or shape of the sperm cells.
You've seen those are good motility sperms. They are moving forward, and they even showed it in higher magnification. Now look at the sperms count where the motility is poor, or the count.
This specimen demonstrates both a low count and a low motility. There are many immature sperm forms present, and the progressive motility is poor. Here is another example showing a poor count and poor motility. This one also shows significantly abnormal morphology. Here's one more example of sperm with a very low count and a poor motility. We see that the sperm are twitching and wiggling in place, but there is no progressive motility. In order to get a pregnancy with sperm like this, we will need to perform IVF with ICSI and inject the sperm directly into the eggs.
You can see in these ones, the sperms are just wiggling and twitching in one place, and the majority are abnormal, and the number is few. In that way, as they said, only intracytoplasmic sperm injection is a solution where the sperm is directly injected into the egg. Let's start with this one. Artificial insemination. People call it insemination or intrauterine insemination. It means the same thing. The common out there, they call it artificial insemination because it's artificial. But usually it's better being called intrauterine insemination because we inseminate inside the uterus. Insemination means you can only inseminate the sperms. It's either the husband's sperms. If it's the husband's sperm, they call it artificial insemination by husband sperms. If there's severe husband sperm abnormality, or for some reason the husband cannot donate sperms, you can use a donor sperms. There are sperm banks there. There are men who goes there and donate their sperms. In South Africa, you donate for fun. They pay you for donating. But in UK, they've put a rule that you can't make money out of sperm. If you donate, it's charity. You don't get anything. If you get any compensation, it just be for traveling. But there are a lot of sperms banks there where you can go and collect sperms. If you go there, they will give you all characteristics of the donor, the height, the length of the educational status, the color of the eye, color of the hair, the racial group, what it is, and you choose whether you want. Then sperm donation will only done only if there is severe male factor infertility, more especially azoospermia, a man who doesn't produce sperms at all. If there are sperms, even if they are less or they're abnormal, usually you can conceive with those sperms. There's no, if the ones there are sperms, conception can happen either through ICSI or IVF. It can happen. But if there are no sperms at all, the only solution is artificial insemination by donor sperms. Usually we see a lot of artificial insemination by donor sperm these days, where ladies decide that she's going to be celibate. A single lady, educated, financially all right, but she decided that she's going to be celibate, but she wants a baby. The only way she can have a baby is artificial insemination by donor sperm. In South Africa, we have got lesbian couples. Now they are becoming men. Yeah, every second couple is a lesbian these days, and gays. But they want children. Lesbian can produce sperm. Two ladies cannot produce sperm. So for them to get sperm, they must go for a donor sperm. They either go to sperm donor, they can get a known donor. A known donor, usually in the lesbian, they ask a friend or a relative and say, I want a baby, can you donate sperm for me? If a friend or relative agrees, he goes to the bank and gives sperm. Those sperms are used to inseminate that woman, she'll have a baby. Or unknown donor, usually, if you go to the lab, you decide, I want an anonymous donor, which has got a legal implication as time goes on, because legally, every child has got the right to know who the father is once the child is 18. If it's a known donor, your risk is that when she's 18, she wants to know who the father is. You are in a quandary. You have to lie to say the father is dead or something. But if it's anonymous, then you fill up the forms there, and there's a lot of legal jargon that you go through, and then you decide that this child will never know the father. But if it's a known donor, then there's also declaration. You go to the Commissioner of Oaths and sign that even if the donor is known, you are not going to later, the donor is not going to later come and claim the paternity of the child. Or you, the woman, you are not going to later, when things are tough, and say the donor must come, you must sue the donor for maintenance because it's his own sperms. Those are legal things that you go through. It's not just things that you can just walk in and say, I want sperms. It involves the lawyers and contracts. It's a contract where you will be told about the character of the donor, because you don't want to get a person with schizophrenia donating to you. Of course, they don't take, when they take this sperm, they screen these people. They don't take somebody from jail and donate sperm. And they are stored in the laboratory. Sperms that are stored in the laboratory is called, they are stored in what you call sperm bank. They say it's a bank. They call it sperm bank. I don't know what, because sperms don't multiply there. And then, because there's cost in storing those sperms, although they donated free of charge, but you have to pay for it, because the laboratory, they've got to pay for electricity and liquid nitrogen, all those storing material, they're bought. And then they can do artificial insemination or IVF through those sperms in the lesbian couples, or in single individual who are celibate, or people who for some reason, the men cannot give enough sperm. One factor that usually people jump it, but it's not an absolute cause of infertility. If sperm cannot move forward, you can still use other assisted reproductive technology to achieve pregnancy. Like you look at the two types of sperms here. The one on the left are normal moving. The one on the right are few and are not moving. But both of them, I tell you, it's possible to achieve pregnancy, but it's less possible with the ones that have got poor motility. You can see here, 42% of the sperms are moving and they are moving forward. On the right side, very few sperms, some of them are just twiggling in one place. Only less than 42% are moving forward. But I must say, in all these instances, you can have pregnancy. But chances of having pregnancy are higher if sperm are moving forward than if they are not moving like this one. So if you go to the laboratory, a patient goes to the laboratory and find that they say she has got asthenozoospermia, it doesn't mean she's infertile, she can impregnate a woman. She can still impregnate a woman. I had a situation where a man started to doubt pregnancy because sperm count was said to be asthenozoospermia. And she thinks the wife now is impregnated by another man. No, it's just a statistical chance of impregnating a low, but you can still impregnate that. So the sperm quality is a feature that the andrologists looked at it very clearly. The sperms that can fertilize must have a good tapered round head with an acrosome. She must have a long tail that can move it and long middle piece with a good mitochondria and with lively sperm. If you look at here, the sperms, some sperms, this sperm doesn't have a tail. This sperm has got a round head. Some sperm has got a tapered head. This is a normal sperm head. You can look, these sperms are different morphological. Some are morphologically abnormal, some are phonologically normal. I want to tell you about something that happened some times back in 2001. On the 11th of September, you know, they call it 9/11. That year in 2001, I was a resident in Tygerberg. I went to Tygerberg to study infertility and assisted reproductive technology. I spent some time there studying these things. And I was in the andrology lab, looking at sperm morphology, looking at this type of sperms, how they look like, to acquaint myself with sperm morphology under the microscope. And suddenly, there are girls that teaches us there. I realized that I'm alone here in the laboratory. I said, where are the people? And there were questions that I needed to ask because I saw some things under the microscope which I didn't understand. You must ask those girls in the laboratory. Everybody was in the tea room watching television. I said, why you leave me alone? They were watching America. America was burning. That's the time when the planes hit Twin Tower. I didn't have a chance to look at that because at that time, on that day, 9/11, I was in the laboratory doing sperm analysis. And how does a sperm preserved? What you call sperm banking. Sperm banking is a process of collecting and freezing sperms to store them. It's called sperm freezing or sperm cryopreservation. They usually freeze them. These sperms, after they've been frozen, when you want them, they thaw them and they make them fluid again and use them in procedures like IVF or intrauterine insemination. And they don't freeze them in a fridge. They use what you call liquid nitrogen tanks. Like if you can see, this is a Tygerberg sperm bank. Inside here, there are vials of sperm inside liquid nitrogen. If you take them, you've got to use a forceps like this to take them out. You can see I'm taking the sperms out of the forceps. That's in 2001. These sperm are cryogenically preserved inside liquid nitrogen. Liquid nitrogen is very cold. And they're stored in vials of about 0.5 milliliter or 1 milliliter. And they are preserved there for future use. Sometimes they use the method called vitrification. Vitrification means nothing but it's ultra-fast cooling such that if you cool a liquid by vitrification, it passes the stage of forming an ice. It remains a liquid. It goes through an ice and passes the stage of becoming an ice, which means stored at a very low temperature in these liquid nitrogen tanks, which must be closed. And if wanted, you go and thaw them. This is the sperm bank in Tygerberg Hospital, where this is a liquid nitrogen tank there. And then the morphology, sperm morphology, if they say morphology is abnormal, is that there can be head morphology, another one, 2 hairs, tapered head, round head, globular head, while this is a normal sperm. Or it can be a tail morphology. Tail, we see that it's a short tail, crooked tail, or acrosome, which is a middle piece of morphology. It can be any part of the sperm can be abnormal. And this, under a microscope, you can see it very well if you magnify it. Nowadays, with presence of electron microscopy, they can even magnify them and see them very well in percentage. But usually, most laboratories use a dye just to dye them and see whether what's the shape of the head, what's the shape of the tail, is there tail or not? Anomaly, is there one tail or 2 tails? Is it crooked or not? Is the head too big? You look at the different morphologies under a microscope. It takes time, and you can count what percentage is there under high field is present. Then you can be able to say, this is the sperm abnormality here is 42%, it's less than 52%. In a normal circumstance, a person should have at least more than 50% of the sperm must be normal. And of those, more than 20% 20 to 30% must move forward. Then that's normal. There's no man who can say, all my sperms are normal. All we have got, some sperms will be abnormal, but the percentage abnormality, that's what counts. Another form that I'm going to tell you, intrauterine insemination, which is very common, involve placing a sperm inside a woman's womb to facilitate conception. You know, usually in a normal process, during sex, a sperm is deposited in the posterior fornix of the uterus, and it swims through the cervix into the uterus until it goes to the tube and meet the egg and fertilize. But in this case, you deposit it right inside the uterus, which means you take it halfway. You reduce the sperm's job to move up, which means it's good for sperms that are not moving forward or they're lazy to move. So you can put them inside, or sperms that are few, you concentrate them and put them inside. The aim of intrauterine insemination is to increase the number of sperm that reaches the fallopian tube, because that's where the egg is going to be fertilized. It's less invasive than IVF and cheaper than IVF. It's usually called artificial insemination, but actually the right terminology is intrauterine insemination, where by means of a catheter, sperms that are concentrated are deposited right inside the uterus by means of a catheter. From there, the sperm themselves will swim towards the fallopian tubes.
The sperm that has been prepared is loaded into a syringe to which a catheter is attached. Then the speculum is introduced into the vagina, allowing the entrance of the neck of the uterus to be made visible. The catheter that has been charged with sperm is introduced high into the uterus, and the sperm ascends through the fallopian tubes, arriving at the area where the oocyte is located, and fertilization of the oocyte is facilitated.
This is just to explain to you what intrauterine insemination is. But usually, with a normal sperm count, if it's done, it will be done in a situation where a woman has got a factor called cervical mucus hostility. Cervical mucus hostility is a condition where a woman has got what we call, one, it can have anti-sperm antibodies. Once the sperm goes there, the antibodies kills the sperms. So you bypass that mucus, that antibodies, and deposit it inside the uterus. Or you can have a mucus that doesn't, after ovulation, it doesn't become liquid, it becomes viscid and act like an operculum and block the cervix. Then you've got to bypass that barrier. Or if a woman has got poor motility, if there's poor motility of sperms, it will take time for them to reach the fallopian tube. So you take them halfway, you put them inside the uterus. I have just explained cervical mucus hostility, which I will. Of course, in a couple, in which condition can you do intrauterine insemination? Majority of couples will find that they are called discordant couple. Discordant HIV couple means one of the partner is HIV positive, another one is not positive. It can either be a man or a woman who is positive, but they cannot engage into a normal sex without a barrier, without a condom. So for them to have fertilization, the sperm must be injected manually inside the uterus. You can even inject, if the sperm count is normal, you can inject them inside the vagina. But for ease and quickness, they are injected inside the uterus by the process of intrauterine insemination. Or some men have got what is called retrograde ejaculation. Retrograde ejaculation means during ejaculation, instead of the sperms coming out through the penis, they go back and go into the bladder and mix with urine, which means the bladder sphincter doesn't close, or she has got a prostate problem that blocks the sperm from going forward, most especially with enlarged prostate, it goes backwards. Or she has got posterior urethral valve, lot of urological condition that can cause sperm to be deposited inside the urinary bladder instead of coming out through. So artificial insemination in that way, it can work to help the couple to have a baby. And usually the method is artificial insemination by husband. Very rare I've said that artificial insemination by donor. We usually use it more in South Africa in a lesbian couple only. This is what to explain to you. If sperms are deposited here in the vagina and they must traverse through the cervix, they form antibodies there. Antibodies are anti-sperm antibodies. They kill these sperms. So there'll not be pregnancy because this woman has got anti-sperm antibodies. The only way to achieve fertilization is to bypass that anti-sperm antibodies and deposit the sperm right inside the uterus. You deposit them right inside the uterus. In that way, the sperm has got less road to travel from here through the fallopian tube and meet an egg there. I want to explain to you what retrograde ejaculation is, because that term you may not understand it. When the semen is produced in the testis and travels out, production of semen and sperms is in the testis and travels. It reaches the seminal vesicles, another fluid is added. It reaches the prostate, another fluid is added. Instead of being propelled through the urethra and be expelled through the urethra and the penis, they take a reverse path. They go back into the bladder. And by that time, that man, when he urinates, you find that he's got milky urine because now it's mixed with semen and sperms. And that way, fertilization cannot happen. These men are they've got dry orgasm. They reach excitement and they think they're ejaculating, but it's ejaculation inside the urinary bladder, which the only way to do is to do artificial insemination by sperms that will be being collected directly by aspirating them from the testicles of a woman and inject them inside the uterus. And the sperm themselves, they'll travel and go and meet the egg, and fertilization will take place. This is common treatment that can be done. Although expensive, majority of people cannot afford it, but it is affordable, as most universities nowadays have got laboratories, infertility clinics, infertility centers, where even if the sperms are lazy like this one, they can do intracytoplasmic sperm injection in the form of ICSI, where they centrifuge the sperms and concentrate those that are good inside the test tubes, analyze them, and either use them for IVF of mostly intrauterine insemination. I said fertilization takes place inside a petri dish, not in a test tube. And sperms are observed before injection. What quality of sperm do you have? We must have a good motility sperms. And insemination is done with you awake, patient awake. It doesn't need anesthesia. You put under ultrasound guidance, put a catheter inside the vagina and bypass the cervix if there's either cervical mucus hostility, and the sperms are injected directly inside the uterus, which has been prepared by means of drugs to accept a fertilized ovum. And the sperms themselves will swim through the tubes until somewhere in the ampulla of the tube, they'll find an egg. If luck is there, they'll fertilize an egg. Many sperms must go around one egg, but only one is going to fertilize. For an egg to be fertilized, it must be surrounded by millions of sperms, but only one lucky one is going to fertilize. Once fertilization takes place, the egg changes and they start dividing. As it divides, it moves towards the ovary, the path from the ovary to the uterus, where implantation will take place and the baby will form inside the uterus. If there's any derangement in this path or delay in the movement of a fertilized egg through the tubes on its way towards the uterus, and it will implant inside the tube, because the tube, when it enters the uterus, is a very thin, it's the thinnest portion there called isthmus or interstitial portion. This must take 3 to 5 days to move there, and must go there while it's still in a morular stage or 8-cell stage. If there's delay, it's going to plant inside the tube and form an ectopic. That's what's all about intrauterine insemination mixed with IVF. There's another method where it's called gamete intrafallopian tube transfer, GIFT. This is an assisted reproductive method which involves taking an egg. An egg is a gamete, egg from a woman, and mix it with a sperm in a syringe and immediately put them inside the fallopian tube. We have said that fallopian tube is the place where fertilization takes place, an egg and sperm there. But manually, you take an egg and a sperm and put them in a syringe and manually go in and put them in the tube so that you make sure that the tube and egg, they meet. The difference between gamete intrafallopian transfer and zygote intrafallopian tube transfer is that in GIFT, which is gamete intrafallopian transfer, fertilization takes place inside the fallopian tube because the gametes are transferred inside the fallopian tube. While in zygote, which is a zygote, the fertilization takes place inside the laboratory and is going to be transferred inside the tube as a zygote. It's just difference. The gamete intrafallopian transfer, you take an egg and sperm mixed together and put them inside the tube. Then the fertilization will take place spontaneously. How is it formed? Firstly, before GIFT is formed, you must do what you call a hysterocellular bingogram. It's called HSG, to ensure that there is one patent tube. There must be a patent tube because you're going to implant that egg, are going to implant it through that tube, which must be open. If there is any peritubal adhesion, laparoscopy must be done to treat those peritubal adhesion and ensure that you've got a patent tube. By use of laparoscope, which is a minimally invasive procedure, eggs are taken from the ovary after controlled hyperstimulation, and sperm from a male is taken and mixed in a catheter together. We don't expect fertilization to take place in the catheter. This sperm-egg mixture is then, through a laparoscope, injected on the femoral end of the tube, into the tube, deep into the ampulla portion of the tube, not in the infundibulum, otherwise it will fall, it will be tubal abortion, deep into the ampulla. Usually, the part of the tube that fertilization takes place is called ampulla. You put it there in the ampulla. This might give you...
What is gamete intrafallopian transfer? GIFT. Gamete intrafallopian tube, transfer transplantation is a method of assisting pregnancy, which includes removing the female egg and sperm and mixing it into the fallopian tube immediately. Unlike in vitro fertilization and intrafallopian tube transplantation, the process of fertilization in gamete fallopian tube transplantation is in the fallopian tube rather than in the petri dish. However, a healthy fallopian tube is very important for gamete transplantation. What is the process of gamete intrafallopian transfer? 1. The patient first needs an X-ray to make sure that at least one of the fallopian tubes is healthy. The doctor will do a laparoscope to ensure that there is no scar tissue outside the fallopian tube. 2. A laparoscope is used to remove the egg from the ovary. 3. When the egg is taken out, the man provides a sperm sample. 4. Eggs and sperm are mixed in a catheter. 5. The mixed sperm and egg will be put into the fallopian tube through a catheter. 6. A medicine will be provided to women to help build the endometrium and help implant the fertilized egg. If there are extra eggs, you can use them for IVF and save any viable embryos for future use. Who can accept gamete intrafallopian transfer? Gamete intrafallopian tube transfer is suitable for couples have unexplained infertility, IVF without success. Both spouses have religious or ethical factors and cannot accept IVF. Only at least one side of the fallopian tube is healthy. What is the difference between gamete intrafallopian transfer and in vitro fertilization? In vitro fertilization is the fertilization of an egg in the laboratory instead of fertilization in the fallopian tube as gamete intrafallopian transplantation. Women can also use IVF to become pregnant if the fallopian tubes are blocked or damaged. In vitro fertilization.
I just wanted to explain to you what gamete intrafallopian transfer is. I'm sure it's clear there. Another one is called ZIFT, which is zygote intrafallopian transfer. I'll explain to you what is the difference between an embryo and a zygote later. In ZIFT, the woman's ovary are stimulated with medication and increase the number of eggs. And those eggs are collected usually like in an IVF. And they are fertilized inside the laboratory. When they are fertilized in the laboratory, the fertilized egg are transferred within 24 hours into the tube. You know, once a fertilized egg becomes fertilized, it forms what you call a zygote, which about 2 cells, 4 cells, 16 cells stage, and 32 cells stage, up to 64 cells stage. From there, when start to differentiate into areas where organs are going to be formed, it's no more called a zygote, it's called an embryo. So a zygote is the earlier form of development than an embryo. So in ZIFT, which means early, within 24 hours after fertilization, when there's still cleavage, that is called a zygote. It is implanted. While in IVF, we wait until 4 or 5 days until it becomes an embryo. We transfer an embryo. That's the difference between a zygote and an embryo. The difference is the time frame and development of that fertilized egg. Early fertilized egg form a zygote. In a zygote, the zygote that is still dividing within first early cleavage, then it's fertilized inside, it's put inside the fallopian tube, and it will move by itself to the uterus. With the catheter, the fertilized egg transferred into the fallopian tube, and pregnancy test, always like in IVF, is done after 7 days to check whether there's been pregnancy. Like here, you see there's 2 cells stage, zygote is transferred inside the fallopian tube, and it will move by itself from here. It transfers by a catheter through laparoscope, with fertilization took place inside the laboratory. How GIFT is performed? The patient must at least have 1 healthy tube. I've said HSG must be done, and laparoscopy must be done to exclude any peritubal adhesion that might retard the movement of fertilized egg in the tube on its way to the uterus, and that's increasing the chances of ectopic pregnancy. The eggs are then mixed with sperm, the sperm injected into fallopian tube, and then it will move there as a zygote and implant and after 7 days, you'll have fertilization. This is just schematically to show that after fertilization in a petri dish, you aspirate the eggs, fertilize them. Within 24 hours after fertilization, transfer it into the tube, and the pregnancy becomes successful. Laparoscopy is a process by which you can see what's going on inside the uterus, and they use this method to aspirate an egg. This through laparoscopy. Let me lastly explain ZIFT, which is similar to IVF, except that in ZIFT, zygote intrafallopian transfer, the zygote is transferred, while in IVF, the embryo is transferred. I've explained to you that a zygote is that state immediately after fertilization during cleavage, 24 to 48 hours. But 3 to 4 days is no more called a zygote, it's called an embryo. So in IVF, we transfer an embryo. In ZIFT, we transfer a zygote. Because the fertilized egg is directly transferred inside the fallopian tube, the procedure usually is called tubal embryo transfer. ZIFT, some people ZIFT call it tubal embryo transfer. So this is just the difference between GIFT and ZIFT. In GIFT, the sperm and egg are placed directly into the fallopian tube. The gametes are put in the fallopian tubes, while in ZIFT, fertilization happens in the lab, and then as the resulting zygote is transferred into the fallopian tube by means of a syringe through a laparoscope. This is one way I can explain to you that once the egg is fertilized, it makes a zygote. As time goes on, it becomes an embryo. As time goes on, the embryo will grow and becomes a fetus. So this is the stage, just a stage of development. A zygote developed an embryo, embryo developed a fetus forms a baby. This is just a matter of timing. That terminology is just at which developmental stage is it. The last one that I want to show you of the highest form of assisted reproductive technology is what you call intracytoplasmic sperm injection, ICSI. It's a highly specialized type of IVF procedure. It's a bit costly. It's good for male, if there's severe male factor infertility. As I've said, that even if the sperms are not moving through ICSI, you can directly inject those sperms inside the cytoplasm of the egg and produce a pregnancy. The sperm is manually injected right into the egg, which means artificial fertilization. It's applicable in a very low sperm count in a man, or severe acinospermia, or severe morphological abnormality. That's why I said there's no man who cannot fertilize a woman. It's just a matter of money now, because these things are not much cheap and the state doesn't subsidize them. Even in state hospitals, if there's a fertility clinic there, you still have expected to pay something. It puzzles me. They say in South Africa, pregnancy is free. You attend free. But if you want to fall pregnant, you pay heavy. So this ICSI, in case of severe sperm mortality, where intrauterine insemination cannot be successful because of poor mortality. How is it performed? With a specialized pipette, which pipette is a small syringe, which is very delicate, as a glass syringe, very sharp and hollow, is used to mobilize the egg. To mobilize the sperm, you pick only one sperm and aspirate that sperm inside that needle. And carefully insert that needle inside the cytoplasm of the egg and inject the sperm inside the egg and carefully remove the needle. That means artificial fertilization. And the egg is inspected after 24 to 48 hours, whether there's any division. I've said that these days, most laboratories, there's a camera that 24 hours look after that egg as it divides. And tomorrow morning, you can just play the video and see what has been happening. Previously, we used to look with our eyes tomorrow. If there's an egg, aspirate the egg inside that micropipette, which is a syringe, and inject it inside the cytoplasm of the egg and leave the sperm there. Once the sperm is there, fertilization happens when the sperm nucleus mixes with the egg nucleus, forming a polar body and a pronuclear stage. Then you can know that fertilization takes place. This is ICSI. You do it under, because the sperm is very small, you do it under a microscope. Here they were teaching me how to do ICSI. It's a very delicate process, but doable and easy and doable. That's why the reason why it's expensive is that the gadgets are expensive. Usually, this thing is done by technologists. You see, these two ladies are technologists in Tygerberg Hospital. This one is Marilyn, a very good girl in teaching ICSI. And I was very proud when I could do my first ICSI there. And these days I've said that you can look at the camera, can watch it throughout the night, and you can even look through the screen and magnify as you do intracytoplasmic sperm injection and inject the sperm directly into the cytoplasm of the egg and monitor whether fertilization has taken place. If fertilization takes place, hurrah. This is what I wanted to tell you. I should have told you before. Fertilization takes place, the tube has got different regions. The first portion, which is like a funnel, is called infundibulum. Fertilization doesn't take place in the infundibulum. If it takes place here, it's going to come back and cause tubal abortion. It takes place in the white portion, which is called ampulla. From the ampulla, it will move towards the uterus. And I've said that if this movement is retarded, by the time it reaches the isthmus or intramural portion, if it's big, it will implant there. So it must take about 4 to 5 days to reach the uterus. And under normal circumstances, ectopic does not happen. So the catheter that put the either ZIFT or GIFT must reach the ampullary portion of the fallopian tube for a successful place to occur. That's why you have to do laparoscopy to remove peritubal adhesion first so that your catheter can go deep inside. And then after 7 days, you just do a normal pregnancy test. If it's double line, you know there's pregnancy. Hurrah. Another topic that I wanted to discuss, which is involved in assisted reproductive technology, is egg donation. Can eggs be donated? Yes. A woman can donate an egg, or a woman can use egg from egg bank, which are donated, or a woman can ask another woman to donate eggs for her if she can have eggs. There are many medical conditions that a woman cannot have eggs. And this egg donation is done by stimulating the ovaries to produce many eggs. And they monitor those ovaries by serial ultrasound until they find that there are many eggs that can be 4 or 5 eggs that can be aspirated and retrieve them under guidance of ultrasound. And those eggs can be stored and used for IVF for the same woman or another woman. For example, say the woman is going to undergo chemotherapy or radiotherapy for form of cancer, but the couple still wants to have a baby in the future. Before the start of chemotherapy, the woman can be hyperstimulated and donate egg and store them so that she must undergo the treatment and then later can use those sperms, because if she undergoes radiotherapy and chemotherapy with eggs there, she's going to have congenital abnormal baby. Then they can give cryopreserved or can just donate eggs for other women to use. These are a few indications for egg donation. Advanced maternal age. Say a woman is 25 years and she's going to go and study. The couple decided for the next 8 years or so, we are not making a baby, we're pursuing a certain form of career. Say the woman is registered for master's and PhD. But they don't want to have children when they are above 40. They want to have children when they are above 35, 38, 39 years. But they know that at that time, the chances of congenital abnormalities like Down syndromes are high. So they donate eggs while they are still young to use them when they are old. Or some women, they know that in the family, there's got some genetic condition, which they don't want to pass that condition to their children because they inherited it from their parents, like cystic fibrosis, hemophilia, cleft palate. There are a lot of conditions that are genetic that can be passed to children, but you don't want to pass to your children. Then you can use a donor egg. Somebody's egg can be used. I've said that if a woman is going for chemotherapy or radiotherapy. Let me ask them to mute. It's another option of building a family, egg donation. The same as sperm donation. As I said, that in South Africa, sperm donation, they pay for you, but in UK, they don't pay for you. So in South Africa, but they screen them. The Nyaupe boy cannot go and donate sperm so that he can get money to buy Nyaupe. They won't accept him. They want good quality people. The last topic that we are going to discuss now is surrogacy. Surrogacy, which is a multidisciplinary topic. If we have to, a couple have to go for surrogate, they really have to go to psychological screening. Not very easy to ask an African couple to surrogate. Surrogacy is a process where a woman who's called a surrogate mother, he becomes pregnant and gives birth to a baby, in order to give that baby to another woman who cannot have children. So you ask another woman to say, be my surrogate mother, which means be pregnant on my behalf. This is also a legal contract because it's possible that a woman can surrogate and refuse. But if you have signed that you're going to give, you are bound by law to give that child to that other man. So it's a contract. And that contract goes with some costs. It might be that you look after my pregnancy, my health, my pay for all my medical bills. And if I have got to go for Caesar, you'll pay for my trauma for going for Caesar. And all those things, not only free. And usually surrogate is somebody, might be somebody you know, or there might just be a woman who say, I want to anybody who I can surrogate for. There are a lot of women that have surrogated. For most people, for gays go and take the gay sperm and ask a woman to surrogate and become pregnant on behalf of this gay couple. It does happen in South Africa. I know very few of them have done that. There are two forms of surrogacy. Two forms. One is called gestational surrogacy, where the egg is taken from the intended mother or an anonymous donor and fertilizes the sperm from intended father, which means the woman who cannot have pregnancy is called intended mother. They take his egg and they fertilize it with intended father, the one who married the woman who wants a surrogate mother, or anonymous donor. The egg can be of the same man who married that woman or anonymous, and they fertilize that egg. That embryo is then transferred into the mother or the womb of a surrogate mother who carries that pregnancy on behalf of this couple for 9 months and give birth to that child and give that child back. That's called gestational surrogacy. There's one which is called traditional surrogacy, which is not new. Blacks, we have been doing this many times. Anyway, we are things doing it. It's just that we don't write up our black science. Black science is not written. Traditional surrogacy is a black science. It's a method of reproduction where a surrogate mother carries a child conceived using her own eggs. Surrogate mother uses her own eggs. It's not the egg from that intended mother. In the gestational, they take the egg of the mother who cannot be pregnant and implant it with the sperm of this husband and give another surrogate mother. Which means surrogate mother's got no relationship. Gestational surrogacy, the mother's got no genetic relationship with the baby. But in this case, the eggs belongs to the surrogate mother, but the sperm is of the intended father, that the husband to that other woman, which it makes this mother the biological mother of this child. While in gestational, the biological mother is the one who could not have baby. The surrogate mother is not the biological mother. Gestational surrogacy, the surrogate mother carries the child conceived using her own egg and intended father's sperm, making a biological mother of the child. This is in contrast with gestational surrogacy, where the surrogate has no relationship with the child. Gestational surrogacy, traditional surrogacy, is just that in this case, the sperms are taken and mixed with the egg and take off the intended mother. Either it can be done through artificial insemination or IVF, which means IUI, other reproductive method, but the eggs are not taken away because this mother can ovulate. But while in Africa, this has been done, but they don't use the assisted reproductive method. The man himself just goes to that woman and they make love and he makes a pregnancy. That pregnancy, the child, when it comes, is coming to give to his wife. That's how surrogacy was done, traditional surrogacy. They know, those who are from Northern Sudan, they know Tlatswarupi. It's gestational surrogacy, except that the type of fertilization that takes place is not artificial. It's biological fertilization. As that woman is called Tlatswarupi, because the other woman usually is done if a woman is married and they cannot have children. They usually send the younger sister there to go and sleep with his sister's husband and become pregnant and give his sister that child and go back home and get married. We mustn't confuse Tlatswarupi with Siantlo. Siantlo is a replacement wife. If you marry a woman and she dies before the family is done, because the woman died prematurely, that family still owes you another woman. They must give the younger sister to come and replace his sister here. Siantlo can be both male and female. In the male, if your brother dies, usually an elder brother dies while the children are small, the woman has not finished childbirth, the younger brother must go into that house and complete fertility. This is the type of high technology that was done in African. I'm putting it here, mix it with the Western technology so that you can know whether this is there, whether there's a place for it or not. Is not for me to judge, but I'm just saying, as I was reading, that gestational surrogacy, we used to do it as Tlatswarupi. So you just listen to the wisdom of everybody. We like listening to educated people. Listen to this man.
Mosadi ha sa etse bana aka khona hore mosadi eo a nyale mosadi o mong kapa monna a nyale mosadi o mong
ha o ntse o phela o sena bana o bua le mosadi bele mosadi yona a o shebela kgarebe ye ka ka toke
mosadi a lo ferele
bana ha tlele yena mona wala ibe yena a ilo ntsha dikgomo mane a o nyalle kgarebe mosadi
am ferela ba nyalla
ba o nyalle a tsamaya le mang wa le lokola ha o ile nka ngwane ka ba ile malome wena o di mona
a bitla ke batla eng
ga ke batla eno wale a monyale a tle wala tla dula mona ba dula ba le babedi le ngwana a hlahangwa pele wa mme ke ena mo nyale fa eo a dilo bodiswa ke mme eno ka mane.
This is what has been happening in African. Whether you can use it now or not, it doesn't matter. But because we're talking about African Renaissance, back to basics, we Africans are proud of ourselves. Probably some of the African signs, we will not leave them. So there's another phenomenon which in Africa, infertility doesn't start now. Africans have been treating it a lot. They call it biological intrauterine insemination. That's what I told you, that traditional surrogacy. Is severe male factor infertility, where there's azoospermia. You know, in Africa, infidelity is not a ground for divorce. You can't divorce a wife because he slept with another, and vice versa. You can't divorce a husband because he is cheating. What kind of things? There's nothing like that. You sort the problem. If there's infidelity, you sort it out and live with it. The same as infertility is not a ground for divorce. You can't divorce a couple because a wife because you can't bear children, or you can't divorce a man because you can't bear children, because there are methods to sort that. because marriage is a societal act. You don't marry a woman for yourself, and you don't marry a man for yourself. You marry for the whole family, for the clan. You marry into the family. So if you disintegrate the family, a marriage, for you to dissolve the marriage, you must call the whole family, because when you establish a marriage, you call the whole family and told them. So that's why it was very difficult to divorce in Africa. There's nothing called divorce in Africa. This came with the whites. So childlessness in a family is a family problem. And either male or female infertility is a family problem. And the family must solve it. And they used to solve it. You listen to this one. Whether this, we can use it now or cannot use it now, I'm putting it here as a form of advanced assisted reproductive technologies, which has built families for years.
Aga, neto gona madume shwa bana beshu, madume hloka tsele shwa, madume hloka sekutu. Go sele go sagala je go shetse ngwana ga le go tsetsetha. Ba re kuka ndi kgetlo go bane mmilo ga sanka wa butse ka go bona tshweni. Go dira kera gore maga shu madume shwa nna kera moshu go mya moshate ba re wa gapa molato wa le sa molato. Ke le sukala le ba je bana ba re kana magore metjela gone ka bana ba o shwe ke dara meita. Le khonne ke tlo ara ba butse go ke bo moro. Re le bo di gaetse di fa bana ka go tseba gore na ge monna a palelwa ke go swarisha kgole goba a palelwa ke go netefatša gore o oketša kgoro a anegile diphetlho puleng go dirwang ka sepedi a ke thomeng ka go letša fa gore monna wa go palelwa ke go swarisha kgole goba a anegile diphetlho puleng goba wa go palelwa ke go oketša kgoro re mmitša nyopa mosadi wa go palelwa ke go godiša kgoro goba go oketša thari a sene thari re mmitša moopa go na le nyopa le moopa nyopa ke monna moopa ke mosadi gomme ge monna a hlolwa ke go oketša kgoro goba gona a anegile diphetlho puleng goba a šitwa ke go swarisha kgole mo kgorong go be go napa go ba le tshepedišo e ba e lataelwa monna o ba nyakišwa goba ke re ba nyakela ra ngwane ya tsona go ya ka gati goba ke re go ya ka kgoro ka mokgwa ba tsibanang ka gona gomme e be yena mo tsenelago tšhemong ya gagwe go mo thuša go atiša kgoro ye rangwane o belega goba ke re o belegela morwarragwe bana ge fela morwarragwe a šitwa ke go oketša kgoro ba a negile diphetlho puleng re ya kwana kere taba ye be e sepetšwa ka sebopego se monna yo re mmitšang rangwane ke wa kgoro o ba tsena tšhemong maraga gore monga tšhemo a tsene monga tšhemo e le go yena o a negile diphetlho puleng o ba tsena pele gomme rangwane a tla tsene ka morago mohlho mongwe a kere o le matšhemo bošego a lalala madipanka tše a di lemago ge go esa monga tšhemo ba moroma kgolokgotswaneng ke gore ba moromela kgole gore a fe rangwane sebaka sa gore a tla tsene gomme go dira bjale ke gore ge a ye go bala matšatši le dikgwedi tša ge nnete gona a fetša go lema gomme go laetša gore mabjala a mela mo tšhemong ya gago a hwetše nako e lekana go ya ka dikgwedi le matšatši go ya ka mokgwa a tseneng ka gona gomme tabebe ba sephiri ba sepipimpi thopa kgororo khupa marama re kgona e re yana e badimong rangwane ba sa tsamaya le tša phala pepenke tše ditaba a re yena ke yena mogodiša kgoro ya morwarragwe e bano di gata e ba tša gagwe gomme go fihlela a fetša go belega thari eo monna a kgotsofala gore yena a se nyaka thari o tloga ka ngwana mathomo go fihla kwa mafelelo e le rangwane a tsena go tšhemong a godiša kgoro tseba gore monna o wa go ena ga diphetlho puleng goba ke re monna o nnete gona a palelang ko go katološa kgoro goba mohlho mongwe a palelang ko go netefatša gore nnete gona o swariša kgole monna go palela ko go swariša kgole ga a kutlwe ke mpa goba ke re ga a hlabe ke mpa goba ga a bolae ke mpa ka baka la gore ga a ne pio ya go tseba go godiša kgoro monna o senya mpa goba ke re o bodiša mpa goba ke re o bodiša peu ge mosadi a ka kopana le monna o le re nnete gona o palela ko go belega goba ke re o palela ko go swariša kgole mpa e sa le nanana e sa le emetse le ge e se ya monna o goba ke re mpa e se ya monna o ka baka la rena a gone ge o ka tsamaya wa kopana le monna mohuto o mpa e sa le nanana wa e bodiša go mokwa go matseleng ya phumega ke lebaka le sentse le tsebe gobane yena mpa e ga e kgone go ka moama gampe ga e moame gampe ga e mokutli ga e dire se.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is the little that I wanted to share with you of the existing method of assisted reproduction, which are above the normal ovulation induction, laparoscopy, chromoperturbation, hydrotubation that every ordinary gynecologist can do. These are the sophisticated high-tech methods that are used solely by fertility specialists. I hope this has enlightened you. I tried to simplify it. All these processes are very physiological and intricate. So, but I think having done like this, they probably, you have got insight into what it means when we say assisted reproductive technologies. Thank you. We can go now and ask questions, discussions. I think I must open for you. I see you can unmute yourself. Unmute yourself and ask questions. I want to see who is there. Can you unmute yourself? Am I audible? Diramela.
Dr. Mahapa.
Okay. If there's any, is there anything le kwarejeng Magampatlele? If you want to ask a question, you can go there and raise your hand. I'll see your hand this side. And once I see your hand, I'll ask you to talk. You know how to raise your hand? What do you call that? I don't see any hand here. Okay, let me ask comment from my friend who's my partner in this crime of webinars. You know, you've got a partner in crime. That is Sam Monokwane. Sam, how are you? Sam, unmute yourself.
Oh, good evening. Hello, Dr. Mahapa. Good evening.
How are you?
I'm fine, and you?
Fine.
No, thank you for the wonderful lecture. I think you've given a very, very wide scope. Even some of the registrars haven't been exposed to a lot of information that was supplied tonight, and they would have benefited. So thank you for that. I think you addressed, for the audience, we just need to say, when you have a problem of infertility, we always insist on, or rather do the test on the husband's semen analysis, which you have outlined very well. On the lady, we just need two things. One, once you have been examined and everything is normal, is to say, are the tubes patent? Is the woman ovulating? And you rightfully pointed out, Professor Thabo Matsaseng, who's now the head of IVF or assisted reproduction at in Tygerberg. I'm glad to hear that you had a training there, which is one of the best centers in South Africa. So in the book that is used by undergraduates, he emphasized just breaking down what are the causes of infertility, that up to, in Tygerberg, 57%. So let's say 60% of infertility is due to tubal blockage or tubal damage. And I think you've rightfully addressed all the issues of how to, of course, you worked also with Prof. Mokoko, who used to do a lot of tuboplasty in the olden days, and gave a lot of women an opportunity to fall pregnant. But we are aware that there are those tubes that are markedly damaged, and there isn't much that one can do by form of surgery. And I'm happy you have addressed this issue with in vitro fertilization. I was laughing as when you commented initially about test tube baby. Now, indeed, this was addressed by one of the videos where the lady showed, and in 1978, the first Joy Brown, Louisa Joy Brown, was born in Britain through this IVF technology. And at that time, it was referred to as the test tube baby, became an internationally renowned method. So thank you for outlining. Luckily, I had the opportunity of working with Dr. Quinlan at St. Augustine in private in Devon. And he did all this ZIFT, GIFT, ICSI. Now, one of the advantages, he brought the Germans. The Germans were the ones who pioneered ICSI, or even refined it maybe. And they would show us how to trap the egg, do the drilling, put that sperm inside. And I like the way you've explained all the procedures. See, ZIFT, GIFT, artificial, in vitro fertilization, artificial insemination, or intrauterine insemination. So thank you, Dr. Mahapa. I think for our general practitioners on the line, to start with the basics, work up